Hi there, it's HorrorTube here. Susan is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Cox, who reside in Washington State in the United States. She is the youngest of 4 sisters and has been a wonderful girl all her life, celebrating her parents' birthdays with flowers and lots of friends. When Susan reached maturity, she got to know Josh Powell, and the two of them got married in 2000. Since the two began dating after meeting at church in high school, their parents had long supported their union. Susan and Josh settled in West Valley, Utah, after becoming married. After a few years, they would settle down in the South as a happy family with 2 handsome sons, Charlie and Braden. By then, it was 9 a.m, 7th December 2009. The preschool teacher who was watching Susan's kids that day was the first to discover something wasn't quite right. Susan and her husband were supposed to pick up their kids at 7 a.m. on most days, but they didn't come until after 9:00 on that particular day. The teacher called Jennifer, Josh's older sister, who lived nearby, out of concern. Jennifer eventually locates the couple's home. After repeatedly knocking on the door, she sees no one inside. When the pair doesn't respond to her repeated attempts to reach them, Jennifer eventually becomes concerned and phones the police. When the cops do show up, they unlock the door and enter. In the living room, they discover an extremely strange encounter. The house was silent to start. 2 really loud fans are running in the living room after that, and the moist floor carpeting was the target of these fans. The couple had vanished from view. Then at 5 o'clock, a few hours later, an automobile approaches the couple's driveway quite slowly. Josh, the spouse, and the children are there. Susan has vanished from view. His sister, relieved, says, "Josh, where the hell have you been all this time?" "I got anxious, called the police, and went on a rampage. I was camping with the kids." "Didn't Susan hear from me?" Joe replied at this juncture. "I can't reach Susan right now," his sister says, leaving Josh perplexed. He brushes it aside, claiming that Susan must have left for work in the morning because he and the kids went camping the previous evening. However, neither at home nor at work has Susan been sighted. The case becomes one of a person who has gone missing. When I checked her place of employment, she wasn't there. I gave her parents a call. They claimed not to have heard from her. The police started inspecting the couple's house more closely. After searching the master bedroom, they discover Susan's wallet and cell phone on the nightstand. Had she fled willingly, she would not have abandoned these. Naturally, suspicion falls on her husband. At the time, the disappearance attracted a lot of media interest. Josh, the spouse, was naturally in the spotlight. An interview with him was conducted by a journalist. "What time did you go camping last time?" Josh said, "I think it was around 12:30 in the evening." Put another way, he and his 2 small boys left the house that late at night. "That caught me off guard a little." It so happened that night there was a rather severe blizzard when the authorities began tracking their movements. Camping at that time wasn't a good idea. Furthermore, when arriving at the campsite that Josh informed them they had visited, they find nothing but a barren wilderness. The authorities found it difficult to understand why a family would camp in the middle of nowhere, late at night during a blizzard. Subsequently, they discovered a number of items in Josh's minivan that had them wondering, why do we need this when we're camping? They were a shovel, a barrel, oil, and tarp. Josh says he took them all because he had no idea what the weather would be like. When the cops first went to Josh's residence, they were focusing on a fan that was running about inside. They perform a luminol test because they think it was drying the damp carpet, a bloodstain reaction test that is imperceptible to the human eye. The luminol test seeks for blood. The outcomes were unexpected. There are strange, permanent bloodstains on the house's floor. Susan was the owner of the blood, according to the forensics. The police currently have enough circumstantial evidence to consider Josh, her spouse, as a suspect. However, Josh explains that the items in the car make sense because we were camping. The carpet was so dirty that it was being washed and dried, and the blood could have been from a small cut where Susan was living every day. This isn't totally out of the ordinary. The authorities were unable to make an arrest because they lacked concrete proof of Susan's disappearance or death. Before Josh begins acting strangely around a month after Susan vanishes, the case seemed to be going nowhere fast. He moves to his parents' home in Washington State, taking all of the children with him. He told me there were too many reporters and he didn't want to lose his privacy when I questioned him why he moved so quickly. Even if he did have privacy, though, it's difficult to comprehend why he would relocate so abruptly, given that he doesn't know whether his wife is missing, what's wrong with her, or whether she would never return. Unsurprisingly, the police's suspicions of Josh were growing. However, a tip was later received from Josh's and Susan's acquaintances. The couple's relationship, which had been together for almost 10 years, was actually extremely unstable. Josh was a self-employed freelance web designer who worked from home due to the recession. Since his wife Susan was the only source of income, Josh took care of the children at home by staying at home. Josh began blaming Susan for everything when things didn't go his way. An associate of Susan's claimed that he grew agitated, anxious, and even violent. As authorities examined the home after Josh was taken into custody, they discovered diaries and films that Susan had left behind. Its contents were disturbing as well. "For my safety and the safety of my children, I must document," she continues. "I have been under extreme marital stress for 3 or 4 years now. Josh threatens me. He told me that if we ever get divorced, he will have a lawyer. If I die, it may not be an accident." Her texts and videos revealed a great deal of anxiousness and worry. It was obvious that she thought Josh posed a threat to her life. I'm assuming that she eventually informed him that she wanted a divorce after all of this. That's when Josh started to feel quite anxious. If he were to divorce Susan at this time, he would not be able to keep custody of the children because she is financially better off than he is. Josh and Susan had been discussing a divorce when Susan abruptly vanished. In case of emergency, the police investigate Susan's life insurance policy after receiving a tip from a friend. And indeed it did. It transpires that 10 months before to her disappearance, her husband obtained a life insurance policy in her name. It sounds like the puzzle pieces are starting to fit together. Did he kill his wife by fabricating her disappearance and then take custody of her? Now he's after the money from her life insurance. Josh went to Washington State and his parents live there. The cops start searching their house since they have serious suspicions. Okay, people, this is where yet another incredibly startling discovery is made. Stephen, Josh's father, and his mother were divorcing at the time. It just so happens that during the police investigation of the house, they find Stephen's PC. On the computer, they discover numerous images of obscene content in addition to several pictures he had taken in secret of a woman getting dressed. The cops are shocked after doing a closer examination. The woman in the pictures was the spouse of his son. Put differently, Susan, his daughter-in-law. The cops choose to look into Stephen more thoroughly. They learn that he maintains a blog. His blog was a constant source of his sympathy for Susan. He had even written a song specifically for her. Furthermore, he had sanitary napkins that Susan had previously used and underwear that she had worn hidden away in the depths of his room, where he lived alone, all kept in Ziploc bags. It's frightening and incredibly unpleasant. It was evident from all of these findings that Stephen, the father-in-law, had negative feelings against his daughter-in-law. In September 2011, Stephen is ultimately taken into custody for 14 separate charges, including surreptitiously photographing Susan. However, I don't believe that any of this has anything to do with Susan's disappearance. Furthermore, Stephen has a strong alibi on the day of the incident. Nevertheless, following Stephen's apprehension, Susan's parents file a new accusation, this time over Susan's custody of their 2 grandchildren. Raising 2 grandchildren in a home with a felon that would not be desired by anyone. They file a lawsuit, and the court decides that Josh, the father, lacks both parental skills and income. As a result, the Coxes, the boys' maternal grandparents, are granted custody of the boys. Josh is only permitted to visit his kids once a week on Sundays, in the presence of an observer, by the court. The Coxes were upset by the ruling because they thought Josh might have killed their daughter, and it was too much to allow him see their kids in the middle of their fear. They accepted it, however, because the children would meet their father, and that was something they needed. A Sunday 3 months later in February of 2012, Charlie and Braden are both invited to an event at the preschool. They are invited to sketch a picture of a family moment they shared. In Braden's drawing, Josh, his father, is seen operating a minivan, and in the back is him and his brother Charlie. The teacher now approaches and inquires nonchalantly, "Where's your mom?" And Braden said, "My mom is here," pointing to a location. And Braden gestured to the minivan's trunk, and he used a black crayon to draw a lengthy thing on the trunk. Even the teacher found this to be too odd. He informed Mr. and Mrs. Cox, his maternal grandparents, right away. Mr. and Mrs. Cox heard the account and knew right away that this might be important evidence, so they called the police. Braden's drawing suggests that Susan's body might have been placed in this van's trunk and transported. Let us attempt to infer what transpired that day from the context and information we have gathered thus far. Josh had the option to kill Susan while she slept or set up a tarp in the living room earlier that day and wait for her to return from work. Her wallet and cell phone allow us to foresee these 2 things. The nightstand had her wallet and phone. Susan could have removed them while getting dressed herself when she went up to her room after work. Alternatively, Josh might have killed her in the living room and then purposefully returned them to the room. Either way, he killed her, and then in the middle of the night, he abruptly woke the kids up and packed them into the van to go camping. And he closed the trunk on her body. He must have withdrawn as far as possible. We are unsure of his exact whereabouts. However, it seems that's where he set fire to the corpse, utilizing what was evidently the car's gasoline or kerosene at the time. It seems like they used a shovel to dig a hole and bury the murder weapon and the charred body while the body was still burning. As a matter of fact, burning the bodies took a long time. We think that they burned the dead considerably faster with gasoline or kerosene if they were only attempting to minimize their volume. Josh arrived home at around 5 o'clock the following day, believing he had fully destroyed the body. Given that he had departed at 12:30 the previous evening, he had in fact had plenty time to get rid of the corpse. Let's go back to Braden's story and continue it from there. It was a Sunday, the day Braden was painting. He met up with his father, Josh, following the preschool event. It was time for the kids to head to their dad's place. So I checked my watch after Mr. and Mrs. Cox gave their report. You receive a voicemail from Josh's sister, Ariana, just as you start to feel confident that everything will work out, because you'll have an observer with you to meet the kids. It's Josh. I'm calling to say goodbye. I can't live without my kids either. I'm sorry for everything. It has also been difficult for me. Be careful, everybody. Ariana immediately called her brother after reading this message, but she was unable to reach through. She was outside Josh's house a few moments later. Ding dong. A guest who had a pair of kids pressed the bell. They leaped into their father's arms with delight, since it was the first time they had seen him in a week. They were going to enter the house together as the delighted visitor watched, when Josh grabbed the children and hurried inside, slamming the door behind him. The alarmed onlooker taps on the door, but Josh remains in place. There's a panicked moment before the sound of laughter and then cries comes from inside. Soon after, there were the distressed screams of the youngsters, and the bystander contacted 911 right away. A few moments later, your nose are attacked by the strong smell of gasoline. And a little while after that, there is a loud bang, and black smoke starts to pour out of the house. And Josh's home blows up. Rescuers from 911 race to the location, manage to put out the fire, but upon entering the house, they discovered Josh and his 2 children dead from burns. The autopsy, however, was much more horrific. Axe injuries to the head and neck were sustained by Braden, then 5 years old, and Charles, who was only 7 at the time. It was believed that this insane man had used an axe to murder his 2 sons before lighting gasoline to start an arson explosion. How tragic. Mr. and Mrs. Cox fell to the ground, stunned to hear the news. They also lost their grandkids as a result of Josh's suicidal explosion, and their daughter Susan is currently missing. And then, a final word regarding the Coxes. The couple is ready to make a drastic decision because they are so overcome by the loss of everything. The guilt of not being able to protect their daughter and grandchildren, and the accompanying melancholy. They were going to take their own lives jointly, and they had a rope ready. All of a sudden, their close friends and neighbors come to visit when the doorbell rings. The couple's circumstances turned out to be a catastrophe, and their neighbors provided them with consolation. The pals started going to see the Coxes every morning after that. The neighbors went above and above to provide the Coxes with comfort. They brought food, shared it with them, chatted with them, watched TV, and left late at night to return to their own houses. The people around the Coxes gave them encouragement and support just when they were about to give up. As word spread of their true story, they received hundreds of supportive notes. Gradually, they started to recover, and eventually, the Coxes established the Charlie Braden File Project, a support group for relatives of those killed in gruesome crimes. Legislation to shield criminals' offspring is apparently another project they are working on. I must admit that I found today's report to be really surprising. It resembled a suspenseful movie with unexpected turns that kept me guessing the entire time. But the only thing that made me smile was that last bit. We don't know where Susan is right now. Perhaps the Coxes have accepted the loss of their daughter. There was nothing more they could do, with their 2 grandsons dead and Josh, the main suspect, dead. The fact that they were able to endure such suffering and utilize it to support those going through similar circumstances deeply touched me. Naturally, not every victim and their family will recover in the same way. However, I hope they never lose sight of the fact that the support, love, and tiny consolation from people around them can aid in their recovery. That's HorrorTube so far. Thank you.